Okay. Do I need a microphone? Do you hear me? It's all right. Welcome to our last and fifth session, everyone. Over the past 2 days, we have listened to many great, high-quality presentations here. I hope this last session will continue in the same spirit. We have 3 presentations in this session. The first one is from Aida Salihović-Gušić, sorry for my terrible pronunciation, and the second one is Amila and the last one is from Saeed Khan from Wales State University. Before we start, I may want to introduce Aida to you. Aida Salihović-Gušić holds an MA in English and American Literature from the Faculty of Philosophy, University of Sarajevo. In 2017, she graduated from European Regional Master's Program in Democracy and Human Rights in Southeast Europe, earning a double degree from the University of Sarajevo and the University of Bologna. Her research interests include the intersection of human rights and religious rights, freedom of religion or belief, and hate crimes and hate speech motivated by religion. Her MA thesis examined the hijab ban in public institutions in Bosnia and Herzegovina. She is currently appointed as an education officer at the University of Sarajevo's Professor Zdravko Grebo Center for Interdisciplinary Studies. Without further ado, I will hand over the floor to her. We are listening to you, and then we will open the floor for the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. Your pronunciation is great. I know our names are quite complicated. Good afternoon, everyone. To repeat my name again, my name is Aida Salihović-Gušić. I come from the University of Sarajevo. Thank you for being here. I mean, I know it's after lunch, so everyone's blood pressure is a bit low, but I hope to have your attention for the next 15 to 20 minutes. As you have already heard, my presentation for today will be focused on Bosnia Herzegovina and Islamophobia. That is internal narratives of Islamophobia that we have in this country. I cannot. Can we change with the slider? Can you change it for you? Yes. Oh, okay. What I will try to do in the next, as I said, 15 to 20 minutes of my presentation is to define actually what we mean when we say internal narratives. What does it mean when it comes to Bosnia and Herzegovina? I will focus on nationalist wartime and post-war storytelling, focused mainly on Serb and Croat nationalist storytelling, but within Bosnia and Herzegovina. But it's also inevitable to deal with Bosniak narratives of identity and belonging, these self-narratives, if I may say so. I will also try to explain these key tensions in terms of good versus suspect Muslims inside Bosnia and Herzegovina, but this is the dilemma that we have worldwide in Europe, but also in Bosnia, of course. And inevitably, I will try and deal with the implications that these internal narratives of Islamophobia bring to, implications for cohesion, for policy, and for scholarship. Can we? Thank you. When I say internal narratives, I think of these repeated storylines within Bosnia and Herzegovina about Islam, about Muslims, and about belonging. It is really important to me, as someone who studied language as well, to define, because I'm going to repeat the word narrative a lot, to define that narratives are not simply just storytelling and opinions. They actually operate through politics, through media, through institutions, everyday language, commemoration, schooling, and they actually echo these global Islamophobic motives, but they can also help us create counter narratives, meaning so that we can see this importance of creating. So in order to explain it broader and further, I've divided them into two broad clusters. First of all, I will try to focus on Serb and Croat nationalist narratives that put Bosniak Muslims in the category of other. So we have this othering ongoing. But I will also focus on Bosniak narratives that negotiate this European and secular belonging together with this religious belonging. Why Bosnia is a revealing case? I think this is quite interesting and important to explain, because when we talk about racism and Islamophobia in Europe and the world and how Muslims and, for example, migrants are treated, we usually hear the narrative, go back to your home, you don't belong here. But when it comes to Bosniak Muslims, you cannot say that because we have centuries-long history of presence in this region, so this is our home. So what happened? I mean, we had to be put in this other category in any way, and so different narratives had to be used. I will talk about that a little bit more later. But it didn't start with the war, of course, but the war emphasized this, how the religion was used as a marker to draw sharp boundaries between communities. So Muslims became something different from other peoples in this country, and religion was made a politicized identity marker. And this didn't stop with the war, unfortunately. I always say we still live in the transition because 30 years after that we still have this nationalist rhetorics, we still have it within our institutions, we still have media, education, and everything remained ethnically segmented. When you think about it, we have 3 constituent peoples, we have 3 languages everywhere. When we get hired in public institutions or maybe courts or something like that, we've been hired with ethnic quotas, so you need to have this much Bosniaks, this much Serbs, this much Croats, so everything still remains challenged and ethnically segmented. And the consequences in this case are not abstract, they are very concrete because they are portrayed in everyday discrimination, in mistrust, in polarization, and all of these things very much complicate our EU path. And we are still basically nowhere when it comes to that road. I'm sorry, I need to catch a breath. Okay, so wartime propaganda. I mean, this is basically self-explanatory. From 1992 until 1995, we had this aggression, we had war. And the main narrative that I said previously, we had to be labeled as others somehow. We couldn't be labeled as someone who does not belong here historically, but there were other things that were implied upon us as Bosniak Muslims. So Bosnian Serbs and some Croat leaders actually used religion as a core axis of nationalist storytelling, and we were framed as Islamic fundamentalists, and these narratives were actually used simply to justify violence and to mobilize support from abroad, because when you are labeled as a threat, people need to be protected from you in a way. So this was a way of doing it. And not just regular people, but of course some important figures in our history and in political life at the moment were used. And I gave an example of selective reading of the Islamic Declaration, but that's just one of the many examples how our intellectuals and politicians and their books and intellectual readings were used as a weapon against us. Also, this derogatory label Turks was used. I mean, if you've ever watched even one video from Srebrenica genocide, actually quite prior the genocide, you will see Ratko Mladić labeling us as Turks and explaining how they are now here to seek a revenge or something like that, which is just revived to activate these Ottoman era fears in general. Also, what circulated as a conspiracy during the war was this myth of green transversal, of this Islamic belt that goes throughout the Balkans, and how Bosnia is the main on that road. This was also one of the ways to mark Bosniak Muslims as threat in this regard. Of course, these narratives, as I said, did not disappear after the war. So we have this post-war persistence, especially when it comes to Republika Srpska, institutions and everything. So we have divided media, we have selective textbooks, we have selective commemoration, we have selective memory and different memorialization of the same events. What was ongoing in the world actually reflected what was ongoing in Bosnia and Herzegovina, because we had the war on terror, and it just provided new vocabulary for some old claims that were already present in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So Muslims were now marked as extremists, as security risks. So these were just the new labels and the new ideas given by some new events in the world. If you hear the speeches from today's politicians in Republika Srpska, for example, if you hear an interview from Milorad Dodik, you will always hear him identifying us as Muslims, not Bosniaks. Bosniaks are constituent people, but when you refer to us as Muslims, you are narrowing our identity. Of course, we are Muslims, but that's just one part of our identity. And he uses it in derogatory terms. So for him, that's in the same way a defense and identity narrowing offense. I'm sorry. So, as I said, what was ongoing in the world and what is ongoing in the world directly reflects on Bosnia and Herzegovina. And what we hear in this European far right, we also hear it from the inside. So, however Viktor Orban names us, you will hear Milorad Dodik naming us as well. Thank you. It is important to note that the same way Serb nationalist narrative functions, there is a very similar parallel in how Croat nationalist narrative is functioning. I mean, we can talk about Herzegovina within Bosnia and Herzegovina, but these narratives are also present within Croatia itself. This is in a way the same derogation, but using just another tools and weapons. For example, when it comes to Croats, they are usually marking Bosniak Muslims as a security threat, and this is just their way of weakening our political position and our path towards European Union. So, I mean, there were many claims from these Croat media, for example, about thousands of extremists existing in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and although these myths were debunked so many times, they continue spreading. And these tools are basically used for delegitimizing Bosniak political agency and to discredit Bosniaks politically and internationally. How these nationalist narratives spread, there are many ways, but if you think how our country is separated in a way, so we have federation, we have Republika Srpska, we have media ecosystems that are segmented by ethnicity and by ethnicity. So from whatever point of view you are reading, you may read on another terms and another levels. When it comes to education, we have different curricula, and for example, selective history teaching, meaning that children in primary or high school or at university level in Bosnia and Herzegovina and in Republika Srpska will learn from completely different history textbooks, and they will have completely different information on about, for example, what happened during the war, etc. When it comes to Bosniak and Croat children, for example, we still have persisting thing called two schools under one roof, meaning that children are learning and speaking different languages. That's the reason why they need to be separated at schools. If you think about commemoration, who is a victim, who is a hero, we also have this very much widespread. I mean, you have Lukavica just near from here, 5 to 10 minutes, and in their municipality you will see a great mural of Ratko Mladić celebrated as a hero, and he is a war criminal. And language choices are also important because they can also signal belonging and foreignness, as well as everyday cues like symbols, like hiring bias, and I mean minority experience in Republika Srpska, returnees, and everything after the war is a very separate topic that can be discussed, I mean, a whole day. When it comes to Bosniak narratives, this is a photo that was really popular in one French magazine because one journalist came here and was really impressed how open we are and how our women can walk freely through our streets. And the mere fact someone was so surprised speaks volumes about how the world does not know us, because this is something that can be seen every day on the streets of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And it's nothing unusual, and it's nothing to be, you know, impressed with. But it is really important to reject the idea of a single Bosniak narrative, because something like that really does not exist. Bosniak Muslims are internally diverse when it comes to their religiosity, politics, identity claims. But the central debate on how to reconcile Islamic heritage with a secular and pluralist view remains, and I think this is what's mainstream in general. And another recurring theme is actually the notion of dignity and belonging. Many Bosniak Muslims constantly have this pressure, I think, to explain that they need to assert dignity and belonging, and that they actually belong here in every possible way they need to express themselves. Can we go? Thank you. When it comes to this internal narratives within this Bosniak Muslim population, I would feel the liberty to say that these secular and pluralist narratives are mainstream, because you will often hear how we take great pride in the fact how Bosnia is multi-ethnic European nation, how this Islam as a heritage actually is completely compatible with liberal values, that living together is not foreign to us. We take pride in long coexistence among Muslims, among Orthodox, Catholics, Jew. And when talking about Sarajevo, you will often hear how this city is cosmopolitan, how there are mosques and cathedrals and churches and synagogues existing together for centuries without any issues and stuff. And usually this is the narrative you will hear from religious authorities. And you will hear constantly the need to express this violent extremism as something that's alien to us. It's not a part of our tradition. And this performative Europeanness is used as a strategy to counter stigma and securitization. But it is inevitable to talk that this is another stream of this internal Bosniak Muslim narrative, and that's this religious revival and concentration that occurred after the war, which should not be surprising because this religious revival was actually shaped by trauma, displacement, and the need for that social rebuilding and social revival. So we have increase in practice, which is, I think that when it comes to theories of secularism, there is something called resurgence of religion, and that resurgence actually happens after the religion was suppressed and by a certain period. So What happened in Bosnia and Herzegovina is not surprising. So we had this increased practice of religion, and it was a form of healing, and as I said, community rebuilding. But what inevitably happened, that some groups of different practical views appeared in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and they were not many. They were not in many. They were still a minority, but they were symbolical when it comes to public debate. So you could often see women wearing niqabs and everything, which maybe previously was not that often, or maybe different preachings that are marked as Salafism or something like that. But still, Islamic community tried not to limit them, but to limit unregulated spaces of religious practice. But that was internal dilemma, because you don't want to show that that religion should be limited, that public performance of religion should be limited. So I think this is one of the main issues that we have when it comes to this public performance. You have mainstream Bosniak institutions, and they are trying to regulate unregulated spaces and reject those preachings that were not present on these grounds before. But you also want to avoid stigma against religious visibility. And I think this is the part of that internal narrative where we still struggle. Yes. Okay, I can finish. No. Maybe we can skip. Okay, we can maybe skip the next two. This is about memory and how we remember genocide and everything. We can skip this one. I mean, if I don't have. Okay. So I think that what is really important to take from this presentation is that internal Islamophobia in Bosnia and Herzegovina is not imported. So yes, we have some ideas imported from Europe, from America, from the world, but we also have it very much locally produced and institutionalized, and we don't need anyone to bring it to us because we already deal with it by ourselves. It's important to note that narratives are policy relevant. They shape everything. They shape schooling, media, rights, and they also shape our EU path. And that Bosniak narratives are not singular. They are plural. We have many differences among Bosniak Muslims as well, but we somehow manage to coexist in between them, and that studying Bosnia clarifies how good versus suspect Muslim binaries operate inside the European society. On the next slide, this is not something that we need to waste our time on, but these are just some of the things that we can have as a food for thought for maybe some future research or further discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a really thought-provoking presentation. Maybe we can open the floor for the questions, but I'll can I ask some questions?
Yes, of course.
The first one, are there any strong counter-narratives against this Islamophobic narratives among the Bosniak intellectual circles?
Of course.
I wonder, and I'd like to hear that, and we can then take it.
We have it, of course, in academia, we have it within our Islamic community, and I think that in the last maybe decade, I think it's really emphasized because we had certain specific cases that brought to us how Islamophobia is actually spread. Because I think some people were surprised how can you be Islamophobic in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but actually you can. When I wrote, yes, when I wrote my MA thesis, I was inspired by the case in High Judicial and Prosecutorial Council, who simply decided that religious symbols are now prohibited within the court. And that immediately excluded all the covered women. So they were first to be, you know, to be affected by that. And I think that's maybe the point, that's almost 10 years ago, that was maybe the point where everyone started talking about Islamophobia in academia. So we have many prominent professors talking about that. We have Islamic community. We have some researchers constantly working on these topics. We have the whole, the whole array of academics and intellectuals gathered around the idea how freedom of religion is important in this country. So I think I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes.
I think that the fact that Bosnia Herzegovina doesn't have a contract with the
Yes.
Islamic community, which is the majority religious community in Bosnia Herzegovina, it's enough proof that we have a problem with Islamophobia. From the other side, Bosnia signed a contract with the Vatican in 2006 and with Orthodox Church in 2008. But now, Milorad Dodik, he mentioned him a lot of time, especially yesterday. So he said, we don't want to sign a contract with the Islamic community because the result will be Sharia in Bosnia. So the answer is that we just want to enjoy in European Convention of Human Rights in Article 9, but the answer is always same. So politicians, a member of Presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina, blocked that contract, and the situation is still very hard.
Second question.
Should we counter this with very
I said here
harsh
for the
vocabulary
anti-Islamophobia picture.
categorizing them as, fascist approaches?
I don't mind, because when you talk about Islamophobia, you can talk about racism, because this is for me outright racism. And the last question here for further discussion was inspired by a talk from our friend and researcher Germana Kuric and Professor Ahmet Alibašić. Does Islamophobia in Bosnia and Herzegovina have a function to destabilize the country?
Yes.
And I think it has. The same as fascism, the same as racism. So I think, I honestly at this point, I think that's maybe the right vocabulary to use and to create this counter narrative.
And on the same level, we can talk about anti-Muslim hate.
Yes.
Is there any other question? Okay, then we can proceed. Our second presenter is Amila S.
Yes.
Finish before you give birth, by the way.
I hope I'm giving birth tonight.
I just noticed this. Come on.
I'm done really with it.
Tonight or tomorrow?
Probably tonight.
Come on. We
What
have to
are
be
we-
quick to finish.
Okay, I'd like to introduce Amila S. to you. Dr. Amila is a senior teaching and research assistant at the Faculty of Law in University of Sarajevo. She earned her PhD in 2021 with a dissertation on the status of the individual in civil Anglo-American and Middle Eastern law, a comparative study. Her research focuses on Sharia law and the right to freedom of religion or belief in the European public sphere. She is a member of the Commission for Religious Freedoms of the Islamic Community in Bosnia Herzegovina and was host of the annual Forum of Young Legal Historians in 2022. She is the author of numerous scholarly publications and an active participant in international research projects, conferences, and academic initiatives. And she is with us today with her presentation called Bosnia and Herzegovina and Islamophobia.
Thank you very much. I want to thank our host, Professor Aida, for having me here. Thank you. And I want to thank my dear friend, my dear colleague, Aida. She was amazing. It's not easy to talk after her. And as well, I will talk about the Islamophobia in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but about the European perceptions. So I will try to explain historical roots in the Balkans, the situation after the September 11, of course, the demonization of Alija Izetbegović, Western perceptions of European Muslims, contemporary European politics, gender Islamophobia, which is very important for me because I a lot talk and write about the headscarf ban in a European public place. And I will also talk about some statements from EU politicians, for example, Grabar-Kitarović, Macron, etc. So in the Balkans, Muslims have historically been associated with the Ottoman conquest of Europe. In some societies, still this perception, unfortunately, still exists today. and a very negative image of Islam developed from the concept of Osmanli, which was equated with Turkish or Ottoman. In a racist and orientalistic discourse, this term came to mean something Eastern, backward, deceptive and nefarious, something that should be changed, removed, or even destroyed. So understanding the origins of these views is essential for interpreting local prejudices against Bosniaks, against Muslims in the former Yugoslavia, as well as in the wider regional and European context. During the early year of war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, many observers describe the conflict as a clash between Muslims and Christians, or between Western and Eastern civilizations, often relying on Samuel Huntington's theory of the clash civilizations. In this way, Bosnian Muslims were placed outside the European civilizational space. Within the Islamophobic narrative, Muslims are portrayed as incompatible with European values and incapable of understanding or adopting them. Islam is constructed as a threat to Europe, which then serves to justify authoritarian and regressive policies. Calls for supranational and super-religious unity of Europeans against a supposed foreign threat relied in the Yugoslav context on the role of the State Security Service and the Yugoslav People's Army. This shows how Islamophobic discourse creates security panic and normalizes state repressions against Muslim population. The aim of this discourse was to present Islam as a monolith and unchangeable entity, culturally inferior, undemocratic, and violent, allegedly threatening Western civilization. In Croatia, a narrative emerged portraying the war in Bosnia as a civilizational conflict, with Croatia depicted as the bulwark of Europe, defending the West from the Islamization of the Balkans. Professors from Slovenia, Erjavec and Volcic, show that some Croatian journalists adopted global anti-Islam narratives to legitimize war crimes against Bosniak civilians and to justify the nationalist ideology of Great Croatia. Similarly, in Serbia and Croatia, Bosniaks were portrayed as an artificial nation, while Muslims were depicted as carriers of endangered Islamic conspiracy aimed at taking over the Balkans and Western Europe. This narrative intensified after the attacks of September 11. In Croatia, crimes committed against Bosniak civilians were framed as a part of the global war on terror, often compared to US military actions in Iraq. So Bosnia was labeled a Balkan base of terrorism, and violence against Bosniaks was presented as a fight against terrorism. So Bosnia today is a secular state with no state religion, and the Muslims, before the war especially, they didn't practice religion at all. So if we know that fact, we cannot understand, of course, this policy of the Croatia. A key element of this discourse is the long-term demonization of Amila S, who has been portrayed as an Islamic fundamentalist seeking to establish the first Islamic republic in Europe. It's there. So, Islamic declaration for which he was convicted in a politically motivated trial has been used as evidence. These attacks continue despite Izetbegović's clear statement. As you know, he said that he definitely doesn't want an Islamic republic. He said, I want Islam to survive in this part of the world. Contacts between Bosnian politicians such as Aida Salihović and Libya were also used to support claims of a militant Islamic agenda. Okay. Anti-Muslim attitudes were not limited to local actors. Even before the term Islamophobia became widely used after the 1997, such views were present among some diplomats and Western journalists. The arms embargo against Bosnia was justified by claims that weapons would only add fuel to the fire, reflecting fear of armed Muslims. Journalists also used phrases such as Muslim-dominated government of Bosnia and Herzegovina, emphasizing religion over political reality. Anthropologist Tony Bringa argues that many Western observers view the presence of Muslims in Europe as an anachronism, a foreign body that should have disappeared with the defeat of the Ottomans. The term Muslim evoked associations with fundamentalism, violence, backwardness, and hostility toward Christians, even in respected international media. Our Sabina Čutić, she's a member of Parliament of Bosnia and Herzegovina, a few days ago said that during her visit to White House, some politicians said we want to protect Christians in Bosnia. So.
Who said it? She said it to the.
Yeah.
She said it to the Americans.
No, politicians from America said that to Sabina Čutić. So these attitudes persist in contemporary European politics. And when asked about Bosnia and Herzegovina EU membership, the spokesperson of Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban stated that the challenge was how to integrate a country with 2 million Muslims. I think that in France live about 4 million Muslims, in Germany as well, and the center. So, Professor Fikret Kapčić, citing Pew Research Center data, notes that the issue is not integration, since over 25 million Muslims live in the European Union and neighboring countries, but status. Bosniaks are not immigrants, they are indigenous political nation that seeks a say in decisions about politics, security, and the future of the country. Prejudices against Bosnian Muslim women further illustrate this problem. Austrian politician Sebastian Kurz claimed that women in Bosnia were paid to wear headscarves to change the image of cities, allegedly founded by Saudi actors. This claim was echoed and radicalized by Milorad Dodik, who made unfounded statements about women being paid to wear headscarves. And believe me, even our members of our family think the same.
So they end up in the accepted.
We can talk about
How much should they be?
maybe in the
I always
future,
ask
inshallah.
that question.
Yeah, this is a
Iran is paying these
Yeah.
Muslim girls.
Yeah, that is a part of why there is Islamophobia even between
They
Muslims.
have the same list of arguments distributed to our countries
Yeah, it's always the
to
same.
be used by the media.
The peak of contemporary Islamophobic discourse can be seen in the statement made by Croatian President President Kolinda Grabar-Kitarović during a state visit to Israel on July in 2019. She described Bosnia and Herzegovina as a very unstable country taken over by people connected to Iran and terrorist organizations, claiming it was controlled by militant Islam. This was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern marked by unfounded claims about thousands of ISIS returns. and the systematic stigmatization of Bosniak through security narratives. It's interesting that a few days ago Milorad Dodik was in the United States, and he also talked about the connection Bosniaks and Iran and problems with Jews, about the Haggadah and etc. So we can suppose what these politicians will do. The issue of the alleged returns of jihadists to Bosnia and Herzegovina and the idea of Bosnia as a security threat to Europe was also raised by French President Emmanuel Macron in the context of France opposing the start of European Union accession talks with the North Macedonia and Albania. Macron singled out Bosnia and Herzegovina as a key concern for the EU, calling it a ticking time bomb. In an interview with the British weekly The Economist, he said, "If you are concerned about this region, the first question is neither North Macedonia nor Albania, it is Bosnia and Herzegovina, the ticking time bomb right next to Croatia, facing the problem of returning jihadists." This statement provoked strong reactions in Bosnia and Herzegovina, including an official protest from the country's presidency to the French ambassador, as it reduced Bosnia and its Muslim population to a security threat, further reinforcing the Islamophobic narrative Bosnia as a dangerous space in Europe. And this is a result of the policy of Croatia in EU Parliament. It's not only politicians who spread Islamophobic narratives. Prejudices also come from the academic community, and the Bosniaks are often the subject of studies that portray them through stereotypes of radicalism and non-European identity. Much has been written about radicalization, about Bosniaks, but local experts, thanks God, like Vlada Zinović, Edina Bečirović, and Sead Turčalo from University of Sarajevo, warned that the situation is often can you help me, my dear friend? Exaggerated. Many international experts and politicians focus solely on Muslim extremism, ignoring the real complexity of society. Analysis and media narratives often depict the Balkans, and especially Bosnia and Herzegovina, as a place from which radical Islam enters Europe. It is assumed that Bosniaks were previously secular and European, and only later became radical under the influence of non-European ways of practicing Islam. So that is the result what Aida said. Before the war, Muslims in Bosnia, because of the influence of communism and their ideology, didn't practice Islam, or they, in small percent maybe, it was limited. But after the war, like in every transition country, we have revival of religion, especially in the public space. The Ottoman past is often emphasized to suggest that the region has always been vulnerable to Islamic influence, and even the appearance of Bosniaks, such as having white skin, is used in this narrative as a mask. Their fate is considered non-European, so even white Muslims are treated with the suspicion. These stereotypes create a false image of Bosniaks as a threat to Europe and feed Islamophobia even within academic analysis and public discourse. So, in conclusion, Islamophobia toward Bosnia and Herzegovina is a long-standing and structured discourse rooted in historical stereotypes, but adapted to modern political needs. It serves to delegitimize the political subjectivity of Bosniaks and to normalize repressive policies at both regional and European levels. Thank you.
Thank you for this good presentation, which is also good about in terms of its visual design. I really liked it. Okay, we can take some questions if you have.
should de-emotionalize potential atrocities to happen to Bosniaks in this region in,
Yeah.
I don't know, some future.
Definitely, but it's really interesting that even after the genocide in Bosnia, we didn't have terrorism as a result of revenge. So that is enough proof that Bosniaks are really peacefully people. But I think that the aim of Croatia is third entity,
Yeah,
of course, and because of that, they have these narratives, especially in the Parliament of European Union from Želja Mazulko and etc. From the other side, we know what they want in Republic of Srpska, independence. And because of that, they say, okay, we have a problem with Muslims. You in Israel, you know who are they. So this is really just policy.
It's very difficult for us,
Yeah.
especially what I heard from the statement in the US
Yes.
government.
They have very good
That's a
lobby,
very-
and Bosnians, unfortunately, our politicians, we don't have.
Yeah.
We don't have a
It's a
lobby.
very tough state. May God help us.
Only God can save this country. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Any
look-
other questions? Dr. Mehmet?
Another question, but lobbying is important, of course. Lobbying and cooperating with those actors, civil actors, media actors, NGOs, and politicians who are constructive, who would look at you and at this problem similar to you. However, this issue is quite political internationally. If some Western or let's say non-Muslim, even this is not the real definition for them. So if they do not find that country to cooperate politically, internationally, diplomatically, and that they are not going to use and mutually equal relation, if they are not going to establish a mutually equal cooperation, then you are not a good friend. They do not want to establish a mutually equal cooperation. They would like to know that you are predictable, which means actually you are going to act according to the directions. Until 1 minute, for instance, AKP and Erdogan were great partners for the West, and it is just very easy labeling that he is an Islamist. AKP is an Islamist political party. Easy to categorize. It is a typical religious conservative political party.
As they have
in
in Germany, for
in many-
example.
In many cases, what they are doing is a typical kind of statist or social democrat public policy perspective. For instance, a municipality not letting alcohol in municipality buildings, but labeling as an Islamist or radicalist movement, radicalist preference, it is easy to categorize. But the main motivation behind this is that they are not predictable. And also the democratic procedures are not favorable as a partner, because they cannot know what is expectable. On the other hand, Sisi is more preferable. Why is not Sisi a radical, has not ever been a radical Islamist? Why has not he ever been labeled so? Also the other princes in Gulf states, they have not been ever labeled as radical Islamists. So when there is a very small reform, for instance, women are given driving license in Saudi Arabia. Oh, a very big reform reformist leader, reformist prince. You know, it has been exaggerated in that way. So for this, thanks to the developments of technology, we have internet, we have other tools. Even after October 7, the civil society has become different and diverse, unlike the governments. Still, it is very important to have other cooperations with different actors and in the media. The media in the West has also become diverse. We should also keep that in mind and try to find and people who have common sense in the West, they can realize and understand these inconsistencies, I think. But what you have told is all throughout your presentations. I mean, the arguments are all used in Turkey.
Yes,
Because
I believe so.
it is not AKP or Erdogan. True free market policies, I was telling to you, after 90s, through free market policies, we had new businessmen emerging. They have accumulated wealth, and there are now new civil independent businessmen, and they have tried to get connected with the world, and they have started supporting new civil society organizations, new media tools. Now they are a kind of a threat to the centralized bureaucracy and those subsidized businesses and their siding organizations, NGOs, who considered themselves until recently the safeguards of the regime. Now, both rhetorically, both financially, there are oppositions. There is competition in the field, in civil society, in business. Now there are others. They wanted to keep the rent close to themselves, but there are now new actors. What they used until 97, since 97, since late 97, this has been the argument: backwarders, traitors, irticacı, backwarders, are used by so-called secularists, official ideologists, Kemalist people within Turkey. So Islamophobia is also developed in Turkey as well with these arguments. We had a military, we say postmodern military coup in '97, on 28th of February, which ended up with the dissolution of the coalition government with Erbakan and Trupath Party. Tanks were heading to the presidency to dissolve the coalition government, claiming that they are backwarders, and all throughout the government offices, academies, all religious people were kind of kicked out from their office.
Paramilitary as well.
I think Ali has
Especially
some words
paramilitary.
to add.
Question, but maybe I worded the question after Saeed's presentation,
After
because it is, I think it will address, I can ask that question about Islamophobia, but the question I'm already posing is, which you can answer later on,
Okay.
is, as Muslim was just mentioning, Islamophobia within Turkey, but also within Bosnia. So I was thinking like two types of Islamophobia. One is coming from Muslims,
Mm-hmm.
another is coming from non-Muslims.
Yes.
Internal
Any
Islamophobia.
characteristics, differences between the two. But let it be answered later on, after Saeed's presentation.
Okay. Any contributions? Okay.
Can I just give a book recommendation? Because you've mentioned Tony Bringa, and thank you very much for that, because I think her ethnographic study, Being Muslim the Bosnian Way, is one of the best things that you may read. It's pre-war Bosnia, but it's a very traditional part of Bosnia, Visoko village, and it really depicts that real life of Bosnian Muslims. So it's being Muslim the Bosnian way, and it's beautiful. So if you ever have time to read it, just do it. Thank you for mentioning her.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So, we will conclude with Saeed Khan's presentation. He will frame the issue of Islamophobia in terms of European identity crisis. To briefly introduce him, he's an associate professor from Near East Asian Studies and Global Studies at Wayne State University, where he is also director of the Center for the Study of Citizenship. He is co-founder and senior research fellow at the Institute for Social Policy of Understanding, and his latest publications include Global Studies, a reader on issues and institutions, and the co-authored book What's Going On Here? U.S. Experiences of Islamophobia Between Obama and Trump. He is also a contributor to the podcast Radio Reorient. Okay.
Can you move that mic towards there? There's a mic there.
If you need.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Thank you, dear brother Ido, for really putting on a wonderful conference here at IUS. Thank you, as always, Brother Ali, for all the work that ILN does and gives such an important platform for important discussion, and particularly with the format that we have here. This hopefully will be a nice complement to really two excellent interventions on the subject of Islamophobia. Looking at it from a different angle, looking at it perhaps diagnostically, from looking at Europe and what I would suggest is an identity crisis facing it. Islamophobia, I think, as you rightly said, is sustained. Maybe even we can say it's static because it's been sustained for so long. It's dynamic in the way and the cause for which it's deployed. Whereas if you think about it, European identity right now is actually far more contested from within. And this seems to be then creating what I'll expound upon, which is the moral panics facing Europe, which then create the current climate of Islamophobia moving forward. So if you take a look at Canadian scholars like Charles Taylor, who is the author of the very, very long, perhaps unnecessarily long, A Secular Age, there are certain features that he uses to describe and to define Western modernity, and these are self-defining. This is how the West sees itself, by and large. Having the characteristics of a market economy, a vibrant discursive public sphere, something that Jürgen Habermas, of course, talks about to great length, a self-governing people, or what would be called liberal democracy, secularism or secularity, liberalism in the sense of centering individual rights, and an adherence to the rule of law. Now, if we take a look at this as children or grandchildren or great-grandchildren of the colonial projects that Europe then put upon the earth, we can go ahead and ask also if this form of modernity was experienced via colonialism. And this is speaking to the colonized people, and more specifically Muslims. As far as market economy, yes, Muslims did experience Western modernity through market economy, except we were the producers of raw materials for imperial states and, of course, exploited heavily in that pursuit. As far as all of the other characteristics, these were some things that were denied and even deprived to the colonized people, despite the pronouncements by, of course, the West, that these were eternal and universal values. And that disruption and that hypocrisy, I think, is a very key thing to go ahead and consider. I apologize for the smaller font here, and I didn't mean for this to become an eye test for everyone. If you look at then the Western state of being modern, I would suggest to you that these are also characteristics to consider. The rise of the nation state, which then puts historically this Western modernity into a post-Westphalian, post-1648 paradigm. The growth of tolerance as a political and social belief, and I probably should have put tolerance in quotation marks here. Industrialization played a very big role, along with the rise of mercantilism and capitalism. The discovery, or the so-called discovery and colonization of the non-Western world, played a huge role in this, particularly when it came to the exploitation and the acquisition of capital. in quantities that were at this point unprecedented. The rise of representative democracy, increasing role of science and technology, particularly during the period of the Industrial Revolution, urbanization and mass literacy, along with the proliferation and, of course, related of mass media, and then this whole notion of the Cartesian and Kantian distrust of tradition for autonomous reason. And I know there were several papers that were given yesterday as well that mention reason, and I'm very appreciative of that. As far as if you think about it today, and if you're looking at Charles Taylor's model of what defines modernity, these are, according to the Brookings Institution, what are the challenges to democracy today? Open up the newspaper, and certainly in the United States, each of these has a particular resonance today. Protecting elections, defending rule of law, fighting corruption, reinforcing civic and media space, protecting pluralistic governance, counter disinformation, and making democracy deliver. These were constantly used as a cudgel against the non-Western world to otherize them, to inferiorize them, saying, see, this is why you are backward. But now it seems as though there is an inversion, and these are questions that are now being asked of Western countries vis-a-vis their commitment to upholding democracy. So here's a few images that we see that take a look both at the US as well as the other side of the Atlantic, and you see a lot of parallels and similarities here. Protests happening about US voting rights. In fact, just yesterday, the House voted down in the United States a law that would, or a bill that would completely change the eligibility or the requirements to prove your eligibility to vote. I think it's telling that 64% of Americans don't have US passports, 70% cannot find a copy of their birth certificate, and another 40% of women don't have a last name that matches the name on their birth certificate. So, for obvious reasons. So the challenges then of trying to present the appropriate paperwork at the polling booth to then be able to verify your eligibility means that the chances of disenfranchisement are very high, that for democratic countries it seems as though there's more barriers to be democratic than there is to actually exercise your democratic values and rights. Here you see similar issues happening in Great Britain when it comes to nationality and border bill protests. So there's definitely something happening on both sides of the ocean here. The European criminalization of protests, that despite the fact that one of the defining features is a vibrant discursive public sphere, we have seen, particularly through the lens of Gaza, that there are clearly limitations. The idea of not only criminalizing speech, but even threatening to denaturalize or to strip people of citizenship if they dare to go ahead and speak based on certain kinds of prohibited content. The militarization of cities, we've seen this happening not only here with Washington, D.C. and the deployment of the National Guard, but threats by President Trump to actually violate what's known as the Posse Comitatus Act, a long-held tradition that the U.S. cannot deploy its own military in the streets. And coming with the 2026 November midterm elections, there is a real consternation that there is going to be the deployment of either military or paramilitary forces near polling booths as a way to scare people from being able to exercise their right to vote. Media self-censorship has occurred. I'll give you just one example that happened 10 days ago when Vice President Vance and his wife went to attend the opening ceremonies of the Milan Cortina Winter Olympic Games. The U.S. team came into the stadium. They were actually welcomed rather warmly, but when the Jumbotron showed their pictures, they were resoundingly booed. The booing was actually something I watched on Canadian broadcast television. My sister in Manchester, England, watched it on BBC. But the American network that was covering it self-censored it by reducing the volume so that you couldn't hear the booing of the American vice president. So the complicity of corporate media is now fully in when it comes to distorting the lens of what otherwise has always been considered to be a relatively free press. And here you see, again, examples in Europe and the hypocrisy. that Charlie Hebdo, of course, can say whatever it wants to disparage Islam, although it claims to disparage religion as a whole. It has a disproportionate focus on Islam. And then when Iran decided to call out the West on its hypocrisy with the Holocaust cartoon contest, there was an intense demonization of that whole incident. This is Columbia University in New York City, which was the site of, as I'm sure you recall, over the last 2 years, a lot of protests, a lot of encampments, and like other campuses around the United States, UCLA, the University of Michigan, very violent clampdowns, but then also the cost of jobs, the cost of livelihood, doxing, as well as university presidents being forced to resign, students finding out that their job offers were being rescinded. So the idea then of both academic freedom as well as the normal process of economic due process was really being compromised in this situation. Selective applied secularism, you see, of course, with France on the left when it comes to religious symbols, but in 2019 when the Cathedral Notre Dame went up in flames, they immediately raised $2 billion in 24 hours, saying that this is a national symbol, which then really makes one question a commitment to laïcité over there. When it came down to the sort of quote-unquote cultural significance of the cathedral, and not to upset the hunchback, they went ahead and collected ample money for that. Religion in the public sphere is also something that we have happening. In 2006, at a conference in Istanbul, Jürgen Habermas declared that we have now entered a post-secular paradigm, particularly in the West. And it's very telling that this value that had always been seen as, and pardon the pun, a sacred value of the West to define itself was now something that was being abdicated, while at the same time, when religion was part of the public sphere in Muslim countries, this was seen as a cause for demonization of those communities. Here we find that even those who are supposed to be citizens are not safe and immune from state action. Foucault, of course, talks about governmentality and biopower, and the way that the body is surveilled today has reached a historically unprecedented level. As I mentioned before, you have the concept of revocation of citizenship and the creation of statelessness. I think, Joe, we were talking about a baby being born stateless at lunch. Here you have Shamima Begum, who, after taking her A-levels, traveled from London through Turkey to Syria. She became a so-called ISIS bride, and although she herself was not involved in any theater of combat, she wanted to return to the UK. The UK revoked her citizenship, said that because she's ethnically Bangladeshi, she should go there, but she has never had any ties there. She was not born there, and so right now she is still languishing in a refugee camp in Syria as someone who is stateless. So the arbitrary nature for the state to go ahead and strip what is considered to be one of the fundamental rights of Western modernity, or any country that has been set up within the Western modern construct, is now something that is contested. And so we see here that in places like the United States, the curtailment of individual rights, which is the cornerstone of traditional or classic liberalism. The National Security Act, FISA, or the Foreign Intelligence Security Act, which is now is being contested as to whether it will be renewed in its entirety in the U.S. Congress. The USA Patriot Act passed after 2001, the Protect America Act, and then the USA Freedom Act. And notice, of course, how very jingoistic the names of these laws happen to be. So what I would argue is that what's happening in the United States, what's happening in Europe, the West, or the so-called West, is really an identity crisis with these various causations. As I mentioned before, what is the issue is the dynamic nature of the causes of Islamophobia, how it is then deployed. We have, of course, the excellent work of Cohen in defining moral panics. We have the loss of economic dominance of the West and the erosion of the Western hegemony, an illiberalization of democracy, along with added and enhanced tribalism. We have European versus national identity. I would actually suggest that the formation of the European Union created perhaps an unintended moral panic, because Europe is caught between a national identity and a supranational identity, and it cannot go ahead and decide whether or not those things can actually coexist. It's not so much about whether Muslims can coexist in a broader European society, but whether we can have assimilation of national and supranational identities. The abandonment or the reinforcement of modernity values, whatever that means, and the retreat from the free expression to be able to communicate these things all then lead into Islamophobia. And so here we find, as I mentioned before, Cohen's work is very instructive on defining what a moral panic is. A condition, an episode, or person, or group of persons who emerge to become defined as a threat to societal values and interests. At this moment, that would be Muslims. That the fear is widespread, disproportionate, involves these groups that pose, and I think this is the critical word, an existential threat to societal values. And then, as I mentioned before, the use, the complicity of the mass media in presenting to the public the panic with the narrative that it causes. We can talk about how, in one sense, we've already transitioned past the age of modernity into the age of postmodernism. And this was supposed to actually be a redemptive factor. It was supposed to allow the erosion of the grand narrative and respect and acknowledgement for other narratives, particularly those who were coming out of the yoke of the colonial project. Instead, what it has actually done, it has created competition, and for those who were trying to assert and make permanent the grand narrative of Western dominance and hegemony, something that they can no longer sustain because everything is relative. I always ask the question that with the Cold War, did history really end? In fact, Francis Fukuyama claimed that it did. He was humble enough 11 years later to admit that he was wrong. But with the end of the Cold War, actually created a very strange moral panic. It became actually not a victory per se, but a Pyrrhic victory, because Europe now lost a sense, and the West in general, lost a sense of who it really was, particularly with the fact that despite the collapse of the Soviet Union, China and the rest, if you want to call it the BRICS nations, came about. Which means then that modernity and the West are at a crossroads right now, particularly at the very essential level of identity. How does Europe then and the West move forward is one question. But when we're studying and asking the question about how to create strategies when it comes to combating Islamophobia, it's critical to then explore what is shifting in the imagination of the West as to how it sees itself as then a deterministic factor to how the West sees Muslims. Thank you.
Thank you for
I
your
couldn't understand your final verb. How the West?
I'm sorry? Oh, I said that how, in order to understand how the West sees Muslims and the way it deploys Islamophobia, we need to understand how the West sees itself, because that is certainly not a very static thing. In fact, I would argue it's quite schizophrenic.
Thank you for the presentations, the three of you. We can take any questions.
Did you want to re-ask your question, Brother Ali?
Yeah,
Yes.
I think from the previous presentations we have heard since morning, Islamophobia, of course, has been a recurrent theme in most of the presentations. So I was wondering if, the speakers would like to highlight differences, Islamophobia, characteristics of Islamophobia, especially when it comes from Muslim countries like Tunisia, Turkey, in which they are dominantly Muslim population, but then clearly different groups challenging Islamists versus
I mean, in one sense, I think that Islamophobia from within, we have to ask the question, is this Western Islamophobia being reproduced within Muslim countries? Because if the sources of Islamophobia in these countries are simply, as Fanon would say, white skin, black masks, or I should say black skin, white masks. I always get that one wrong. Or, Joe, help me out. Didn't Hamid Dabashi write a similar book about brown masks?
Yes.
Yeah. And this idea then that, I'll give you the example, the United Arab Emirates goes ahead and employs a Swiss company to then go ahead and serve as a way to literally foment Islamophobia in the West. So when you have these quote-unquote Muslim actors doing this, and not even focused internally on their own countries, but looking at it in an exporting way to Muslims in the West, then we have to ask, where's that line of demarcation that you're saying about internal Islamophobia versus external Islamophobia?
So you don't see a clear line?
You ever see the movie Inception? You have to kind of go a level down and then a level down to the source and what is the relationship that is driving it, because it seems as though it's clearly...
You give me a simple answer.
Oh, come on, I mean,
No simple
how long
answer.
have you known me? But one point I would like to make that I didn't before is that if the West is no longer interested in upholding the values that it defines itself, including liberalism, that if it's like cutting the shackles of liberalism, does that mean that it is now in play and others can then go ahead and take that liberalism, free it or liberate it from a Western construct, and in this case with the Islamicate, embrace liberalism into a new fashioned liberalism that is free of all of the Western baggage that's there. So we're, I think, at an inflection point right now.
Yeah.
So I'd like to just press you on that point, because on the previous conference at Ireland, you bring that idea up. I think yesterday we were also talking about Confucianism as an alternative, and you mentioned BRICS as an alternative. So I'm wondering if you can also you identified some characteristics of Western modernity today. So can you have a similar list, maybe incomplete list, of what is the alternative?
Yeah, sure. In fact, we can go back to that list, and there may be some overlap. Boy, this clicker's a little bit slow. It reminds me of my TV.
My position remains that I don't know if there is an alternative which is clearly distinct from what you say, and especially if you if you don't look at this from power perspective. Of course, BRICS countries also try to have their...
Sure. So if you take a look at this list then, there's a way to answer this question normatively, and then there's a way to answer this question empirically. And so empirically, if we look at the alternative to these, we have a highly, and I know this is really heretical to say at an island thing, we have a centralized economy model with China. But then how... And that's why I already recognize my own heresy. But then we also have to ask the question that how much daylight is there between a Chinese model and a Western model now, especially with my president or the president of the country where I live talking about tariffs all day long as opposed to the free market. A visible discursive public space. We know that there are several places in the non-Western world, and the West always likes to remind us of this, that the discursive space is not very free and open. But that doesn't seem to be necessarily a problem in those societies. Liberal democracy is starting to wane in many Western countries. So the alternative to that, I mean, and this is something that has even been substantiated in American polling, that 35% of Americans between the ages of 18 to 34 say they don't have a problem with less democracy. They actually see this as, they see authoritarianism or authoritarianism light as being acceptable. Secularism, we don't even need to talk about that because that line is so fallacious in the West. As well as the idea then of individual rights. You have tribalism, you have communitarianism now in the West in a way that we hadn't seen, at least matching the rhetoric of individualism in quite a while. And Gaza, I think, has exposed the West's contradictions, its hypocrisies, and really its unwillingness to adhere to the very international system of the rule of law that it established.
So sorry,
Yeah.
interrupting you,
Yeah.
my apologies. So empirical differences are clear.
Mhm.
What is the normative difference? Where is your personal position? If you say that public affair is decreasing and authoritarianism is not there, would you be happy with less authoritarianism? With your personal position?
Would I be happy with more authoritarianism?
Or less, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh no.
Okay.
No. But I don't think that less authoritarianism is pegged to a Western model. I think that is now something that we can go ahead and disprove or refute, both normatively and empirically. You know, when the West was talking about democracy, where did it bring it to the colonies? No, of course it didn't. So I think Muslims are in a unique position of being the beneficiaries of the hypocrisy that the West has always had when it comes to the difference between the rhetoric and the reality. And so as the West is catching up to its real self, I think that leaves us with an opportunity to go ahead and then take the concept of liberalism and refashion it in a way that is actually more consistent with what liberalism really is.
Okay, second question is from...
Just a follow-up to this point, as I mentioned yesterday. Actually, for a long time, the intellectuals and politicians and many people in the West, in the Middle East, in the Muslim world, believed and declared that actually there's liberalism, some certain democracy, etc. That these are Western institutions, Western values, etc.
Yeah.
And we have been trying hard to convince that actually these are not particular and the output of Western world, but these are human, universal, common values. Now it is for us to, speak up and say, even the Western world, the vein of these values, democratization, liberalism, Islamophobia, etc., etc. Now it's for us a good opportunity to say, okay, we are here for defending liberalism, democracy, human rights, individual liberties. These are not the product of or ex-product of the West, but the delinking the values, the universal human values from West, and defending it as a common universal Muslim values as well.
Last year I gave the paper in Istanbul on constitutionalism, and I made the argument that the Medina Constitution is actually a far better constitution than Western constitutions, because Western constitutions were based on a post-Westphalian model that then went ahead and created spaces of sameness. The only way that Europe kept the peace after the 30 Years' Wars is creating homogeneous spaces all around. The diversity of societies today is more reflective of the Medina Constitution, because the Prophet ﷺ recognized the ethnic, religious, political, socioeconomic diversity, which made it a much more authentic constitution for today than documents like the American Constitution and the French Constitution. So we have that built in that we can go ahead and do that.
Exactly.
That's why we can redefine liberalism based on our own actually heritage.
Yeah.
Yes.
And something that I want to ask, I know, sorry, you're
Okay.
no, thank you. You see, when it comes to the citizenship right, in 2023, when the war started, started in Sudan, and suddenly there was like US citizens, Sudanese US citizens, and also UK and German. So in the media, they criticize the UK government. They say, why you were late to evacuate you British citizens from Sudan? Guess what he said? This
That actually is what they are trying to say. No, we are just have done a favor for them because they are a UK passport holder. They are not citizens. So that's my question now.
Yeah.
Is that mean that I'm actually not a citizen? I'm a UK passport holder.
Yeah.
Then at one point of time, if you want to take me out of the country, you can just take the passport.
20 years ago, the U.S. did the same thing in evacuating Lebanon during the Israel war that summer. The media referred to them not as American citizens, but as Lebanese with U.S. passports. So right then, yeah, same thing. I mean, 20 years, the rhetoric hasn't changed. The policies haven't changed. So this is exactly it. And now you're finding that people in the West, and I'm not talking about transplanted people. I'm talking about people born, quote unquote, European or Anglo-Americans now starting to wonder whether they're going to be stripped of their citizenship because of political, ideological, or discursive reasons.
If Shabina Begum was a white lady, they would have brought her back to the UK.
Of course. Of course. Yeah.
You know?
I forgot my question 5 times now. But
Okay.
Okay, I like the idea. They're losing tourism, we should take it over. But where do you see the capacity for it to be implemented, if not in the Western world? If we embrace it theoretically, which still exists in the Western world, wouldn't that make us also hypocrites? Like, if I may be extreme, they are becoming. If we cannot implement it, we just talk about it, but it is not in the field, no. So do you see somewhere potential capacity for us to actually implement our
Yeah, I do, Ido, because I mean, as our good friend Foucault would say, I mean, it really comes down to who holds the power to make this. I mean, it's about the agency to bring about change. I would suggest to you that the level of disillusionment that's happening right now is within itself the inflection point. I made the metaphor yesterday at dinner that what has happened is that the sword Excalibur has been pushed back into the rock, right? The West has decided to abdicate itself from upholding its own values that have defined it, including liberalism. Well, then it becomes a matter of who is eligible, who is qualified, who's worthy of pulling the sword out of the stone. Offering the alternative at this point, I mean, when I say this point, I don't mean like today. It may take a generation or so. That person will be accepted for having done that. I'll give you just a small example. Look at the disillusionment that has happened in New York City that brought the improbable and what was thought of as the impossible is a Muslim democratic socialist into being the head of the largest city in America. So I think that this can happen. But I would also suggest it cannot be heavy in the language of Islam. That, I think, is going to create a reflexive opposition to it. So I think that it has to be done in a very tactful way. But I think it can be done. I mean, I'm not going to be around for it, I'm sure. But I mean, if you want, if you know, you and your technology can clone me, I mean, I'll be around a bit longer.
Yeah, mine was totally irrelevant with final
concluding remarks, huh?
Then I will conclude. I just wanted to remind to use the fact that in Germany, in France, those far-right fascist political movements are gaining more votes, and this is due to the popularity of Islamophobic arguments in popular news outlets. So we should also remind this to so-called liberal democratic circles that you supported this pro-Islamophobic rhetoric, and see the results over the society is the rise of the votes, the constituency of anti-Islam movements, the far-right, extremist, radical political parties. They are becoming normal. They are getting to the right from marginal to normal, and this is all the result of these Islamophobic rhetorics.
I think
we
that
should remind these powers.
I think that,
so-called democratic
I think that
friends.
I think they're going to hit a point. I mean, you're familiar with the term black swan, right? I mean, I think the Epstein files are the current black swan. Because in America, MAGA is becoming increasingly disillusioned. And so now the issue is not necessarily white Christian nationalists versus everyone else. I think the new dynamic and the new binary is going to be them versus the power elite. And as that is happening, I think that those who are actually marginalized can sit there and sip their tea and wait for the dust to settle before jumping in. So,
I just discussed with Ali and want to ask you for opinion. What do you think about the prospects of the Gulf countries? Like, for example, Qatar made a huge improvement in public image in the West of the World Cup. People were really, really impressed with everything in Qatar. Emirates are everywhere in, like Emirates, everyone's going there, buying houses, buying everything. Kuwait also. What do you think, what are the prospects
I think,
of becoming like,
Yeah.
the axis of, I don't know, a better life?
so here's the thing. I mean, it takes two things. Number one, the recognition that you're not going to get all of your individual rights
Exactly.
and liberal rights, and so you have to be pragmatic about it. I mean, I'm not going to be able to say whatever I want in Qatar, right? There are boundaries. But I've got boundaries now in America with what I can say, and so people are recognizing that. The other thing is, with respect, I wouldn't go ahead and lump all the Gulf countries in together. Qatar and the Emirates are two completely different countries, right? Ideologically and all. And I'm not saying this to be flippant, but at this point, those countries which will survive and be seen as viable models or exemplars are those that aren't mentioned in the Epstein files. Honestly, yeah.
Our time is
Joe?
over.
Actually, Joe, do you have? Yeah.
Way too much. I can't get it done in 30 seconds.
We'll zoom it.
We'll talk later.
Yeah, we'll yeah.
Take us in a
Yeah.
whole different direction, and I know.
Okay. Well, as I say, Joe, you got my number.
Yes, we can definitely talk.
Let's close the session. Thank you very much for your attendance. I will give the floor to Özlem for his closing remarks. She said that she has a 90 minutes of speech.
Indeed, Ömer Faruk had this conspiracy. He offered the sightseeing tour.
So we give up the 90-minute speech.
Thank you to everyone, to every presentation, to all participants. I think we had a very good, very fruitful program, roundtable conference. It was a, thank Allah, we had this good choice of organizing this roundtable conference, very fruitful program. We had very lively debates. I would like to thank, first of all, to Ido. I know Ido for about 20-25 years, but we have a saying in Turkish, if you would like to know that person, look at his friends. Indeed, I'm so pleased to meet all of his friends that we have met speakers from International University of Bosnia. And right, we are like already friends of ideas. When you meet such people, you feel like you're meeting members of your family. So I'm so pleased to hear your presentations, your perspectives, to learn about your studies. I feel kind of motivated to do more and to work together more. I'm so pleased to hear we have common perspectives, common interests. Those speakers today, those yesterday as well. So thank you, Ido, for putting this program out together. Because we have just decided a few months ago further studies, further programs on behalf of Islam and Liberty Network. You know, Islam and Liberty Network is trying to grow its activities, its programs. We have a website and we have a new publication, Idrak Weekly, online Idrak Weekly. We welcome you to write about your analysis, relatively shorter articles for that Idrak Weekly. That would be a good opportunity to exchange ideas and start debates online as well. For our other programs and publications, we would keep in touch. Inshallah, we would publish all collections of these papers online and in print as well. We would keep in touch and look for other opportunities on behalf of ILM, on behalf of our local organizations, on behalf of Association for Liberal Thinking. Many ideas came to my mind. I would very much like to work with you. What else? I would like to thank Noor as well for dealing with details of logistics, trying to operate everything smoothly. Thanks a lot, Noor. Like before. We have another day in Sarajevo that we would enjoy our time around. I just feel like I have come to a city of Turkey. Like I feel quite familiar wandering around. Thanks a lot. I wish you the best with your work, with your family, in health, joy, and peace. Keep
And
in
if I may,
touch.
before we finish, we have not seen the results yet, but I'm sure it will be great. Also, thanks to Emma. So we have now put that pressure up. Now we expect it.
She's a part of the conference very actively.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
like, engaging, listening, and
Absolutely.
yeah.
So
She was pretty much in moments. Pretty much very engaged. I've never seen like a professional who is also engaged in the discussion. It's great.
Yes, and please do reach us. If you have an idea and a recommendation. We would appreciate. We are just trying our best and trying to look for what would be best, what would be better to do. So anytime, please keep in touch.